Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Keith. Thank you very much for agreeing to give your testimony to CDAC and for coming along this morning. As you know, CDAC is a commission of inquiry into discrimination against Christians, and we are inviting people to give testimony where they feel that they've been put at a disadvantage because of their faith or even actively discriminated against. And we're expecting the inquiry will last around 2 years. And at the end of that time, we will be submitting a formal report to Parliament. So your testimony is very much part of that. And we are very grateful to you for coming along. My name is Linda Rose. I am chairing this meeting today, and I'm joined by Nina Power and Ian Shelley and Gabriel Elienik. And Edmund, who you've been in contact with, is our Commission Secretary. So he is looking after us this morning and guiding us through. So if we could start by, I should just make the point that this is not in any sense an adversarial panel, but it is inquisitorial. So we will be asking what we hope are searching questions. But yes, just prepare for that. Could I ask you to start us off by just briefly telling us what happened and what the outcome was for yourself?
Yes, and I will try and keep it as brief as possible. The background is that I was working in a local primary school. Alongside my job as a church minister, we had planted a new church, and therefore there's a need for what may be called loosely tent making. Needed to make some money alongside to keep the wolf at bay, as it were. And I had a good relationship with the employer. I was working there as school caretaker, and had been for a year or so. Everything was good as far as the school was concerned. Lots of good things going on. From my pastoral perspective, when we got around to probably somewhere around just after Christmas, and one of our Bible studies, home groups, some of the church members were talking about how to reach different parts of the community, and one of those things that came up, well, how do we reach the gay people? Should we be heading towards Pride? Is it a good thing to take children along to get in, party atmosphere and hand out a few leaflets, talk to people? And my response was, well, no, I don't think that is a good thing for a number of reasons. They are kind of aimed at celebrating sex and sexualization. That's not a good thing for us to be involved in, and certainly don't take your children, because whilst there will be those things that are aimed at children deliberately, as an event, it's really not child friendly. It's something which is counter to our beliefs. So that was a few months before, and it came. The question came out of a desire to try and get alongside people from every walk of life. And so we get to the end of May, and it occurred to me that these discussions have been going on. We had a church Twitter account, and I had a personal Twitter account, and so I just end of May popped a quick tweet out saying pretty much what I'd said previously. Don't take your children along. It's not a good thing for children, for Christians. Best avoided. Now, the response for that was, I mean, I'm not a great media magnet, so my Twitter account doesn't light up very often, but it did that evening, immediately, pretty much. A local newspaper editor, who, unbeknown to me, was homosexual and desperately into Pride, decided to tweet my comment and forward it to a local councillor, local Liberal Democrat councillor, and this lady, who was married to another lady, was again, very much on the Pride March, as it were. So there kind of ensued a lot of Twitter chatter. I just turned it off and carried on with my evening, and The following day was a Sunday. Prior to heading to church, I had a call from a different journalist from another newspaper asking for an interview. My wife took the call. She knew nothing about. She's not interested in Twitter. She knew nothing about the tweet, and so was slightly confused. But as would naturally say, no, he's not available. That meant that we then get to church and find that the journalist is there waiting for us, demanding an interview. I refused an interview, but did just make a very brief statement saying, well, you've told me what you hear about, and I can assure you that there is no attack on any individual or anybody. It's simply a Christian comment on a non-Christian event. Things kind of spiraled from there, from a media. Apparently, Facebook was a big problem. I'm not on Facebook or any other social media. It is just Twitter. But I understand that over the weekend there was quite a lot of abusive and stuff coming out, allegations that I've been child molested here or there. That was all starting to be an issue. That I worked at a local school and shouldn't be anywhere near children. And so the following day, the school were rather cooler than they would normally be to me, and very quickly decided that they needed to investigate me for bringing the school into disrepute. The follow on from that really was what one imagined, an investigation, disciplinary hearings, and so forth. Now, also alongside that, I was told that I was not to be anywhere near the parents, anywhere near the children, and just to get about my normal duties, as it were. I should say that my normal duties were perhaps a little different to some caretakers. My previous role was not as a caretaker. I'd been managing the estate of Cambridge College, and as I applied for the job, I was told that I was overqualified. I was also told that they weren't very keen on having anybody religious on site, and didn't want any of this Christian nonsense. I agreed at the time that I was there simply just to do the job. Within the first week of my employment, I'd been asked to take assemblies. I'd been asked to be involved in RE lessons. I'd been asked to help with some very difficult, badly behaved children, which I did. Quite happy to do all of those things. So that was actually, I spent as much time doing that as I did doing what may have been the role of a caretaker. And so that made things very difficult. If you are regularly running clubs for children who are difficult, regularly being involved in helping with these things, being at the school gates, welcoming the parents and children, and then not doing that, I was told that I mustn't do any of those. I also mustn't talk about the case whatsoever, what's going on, the disciplinary. I was asking the question at that point, well, how do we then deal with this? Because you're saying, I can't talk about it, I can't mention it's happening. But equally, I'm having parents saying, well, where are you? What's going on? What's wrong? Is it to do with all of this stuff that's in social media? And so all of these things were happening. I was put in a position where it was just impossible really for me to be on site. So I did say, look, this is getting very difficult. The investigation was more of an investigation into me and my ministry than it was anything else. I was asked about various other tweets which I'd been putting out. I think actually it may have been a lot of kind of voice for justice tweets. There were some Christian concern tweets, Christian Institute, and such like, which I'd been putting on my account. These apparently were really awful things to be sharing, and that was the kind of role, the way that the investigation went. It was more of a an interrogation than investigation. And in my previous role, I had managed a good number of people, several hundred people. I've been involved in grievance procedures, disciplinaries, and so I knew how things should go, and this certainly wasn't going that way. Between the investigation, I'll try and I'm probably perhaps giving too much detail in it, but I'll just say that between the investigation and the disciplinary hearing, I actually resigned for two reasons. One is that I'd had people turning up at home trying to arrange my funeral. I'd had people trying to sell the house. My younger daughter was struggling with quite serious ill health, and I'm trying to run a church as well. So there was just too much of this kind of stuff going on, and I wanted to protect the family. It wasn't that I didn't want to kind of dig in and stay there and fight the battle, which is important. So I did resign, but I also was aware that if I hadn't resigned when it came to it, there would be one of two things. I'd be given a final written warning, or I'd be sacked. The final written warning would certainly be telling me that I couldn't do this again, and the doing this again would be carrying out my church ministry and living as a Christian, really, whether as a church minister or not, just living as a Christian and being able to have a personal Christian life. So we then went through the process. Though that did happen, I after the hearing, I was given a final written warning, even though I'd already resigned at that point. I appealed that and lost the appeal, and the Christian Legal Centre supported me in taking the case to a tribunal. At the tribunal, there were a number of things that happened, but one of the most surprising was to find that neither the judge nor the team on the other side had the slightest idea about Christian faith, and certainly not what a Christian minister might say, but even what Christians believe. I discovered this too in the school, that the head teacher, the deputy head teacher, and the chair of the governors were all at a loss as to how to explain what Christians would believe. So their understanding of Christianity was something which shocked me and surprised me. The panel, the hearing was, it went well. Everybody gave their evidence, and the outcome was that I lost on direct discrimination and won the case on indirect discrimination. There's plenty much more I could add, but the risk of people falling asleep at this point, I'll pause.
Thank you, Keith. Several questions just occurred to me to get us started here. When you tweeted, you were tweeting in your capacity as a Christian minister. Was it, would people know that you were also associated with the school at this point, or was this something that emerged later?
No, I made no reference to the school, and neither would I have, because it wouldn't have been relevant. And the parents in the school, probably, I would guess 50-60% would know me. If they were local parents, they would know that I was the minister of a church. But yeah, the linkage came from those people who were trying to and managed to succeed, really, to kind of get the mob going, as it were. And so it was one of their tactics to make a point to try and silence me.
Was this school a church school, or no, not a church school? So
no, it was run by a local trust called the Active Learning Trust, and they run a number of schools across East Anglia.
Okay. And I mean, I had a look at the school's code of conduct and its social media policies, and it seems to it makes a big thing about its diversity and inclusivity policies. And you, I believe, had to agree to the code of conduct and to adhere to its policies before you began work. Is that right?
Yes, I'm sure I did. It was a new school. Their policies were some of them weren't actually in place. When I arrived, there was no health and safety policy for the school. In fact, I wrote it for them because it's one of those things that I could do. They didn't have a number of other policies in place. So yeah, I mean, I certainly signed up to say that I wasn't going to be doing anything that would be, yeah, deliberately, aimed at damaging the school.
And did it ever occur to you that you might be find yourself with a conflict of interest, and some things that you said might cause this kind of problem potentially?
It did. It occurred to me prior to taking the role, and something I mentioned at interview. I did say, I'm a church minister. That after they said, well, we know, we don't believe this Christian nonsense in school, as it were. Well, that's fine, but I'm a church minister, and therefore I will be involved in all the things that church ministers will be involved in. I'm preaching and teaching. Alongside that, of course, I'm taking this role on the basis that that if I have a funeral to take, I'll be taking the funeral. That will need to happen. If there are people I need to visit in the hospital, those things will need to happen. Clearly, the work will happen around it, and I'll make sure that works flexibly. And they were very happy with all of that. So those two aspects of the fact that they knew exactly who I was, what I was standing on. I've been a minister in Ely for probably around about 10 years at that point. So it wasn't a new thing, and it's not a big city. It's not even a big town. It's a small place.
So in your view, there was a clear separation of roles that the school was also aware of, and you felt that you could exercise both of these without causing detriment to either.
Yes, and also I think that the fact that whether I was a Christian minister or not, or even if I'd have just been a Christian member of staff teaching or non-teaching, the ability to say the things that I said should have that it shouldn't be doesn't affect the school in any way whatsoever. It's not related to the school in any way, so there should not be any connection there.
Right. I mean, they clearly thought that you were bringing it into disrepute, but I'm going to stop my question at the moment. I'm going to invite the other commissioners to ask questions in turn. So, Nina, can we start with you to?
Yeah, sure. Maybe just a couple of brief things. I was very interested in what you were saying about the kind of ignorance when you went to your hearing, that both the school and I think you said people in the legal situation were not aware of what Christian belief might consist of, right? Which and this goes maybe a little bit towards the code of conduct and the tension between the fact that we still nominally live in a Christian country. So even if the school is not a Christian school of any denomination, it's still part of a country which is nominally Christian. And I suppose maybe this is a bit too complicated, but I'm wondering if you could reflect a little bit or say a bit more about how you might see the tension between the code of conduct, which, as Linda says, is very broad brush in terms of, not only not bringing the school into disrepute, but perhaps not saying anything controversial. And I suppose the idea that schools still have a kind of nominally Christian framework, at least to some degree. And I mean, is the school sort of otherwise saying it's sort of explicitly not Christian or not religious? I'm not quite sure I understand the idea of the local trust in terms of its kind of ideological framework. And so maybe there are two sort of questions, one of which I suppose is, how do you see this kind of ignorance, like what is going on there? And then the second one would be, how do you conceive of any relation between the kind of code of conduct of the school and the broader context of the British culture? I hope that makes sense. Sorry, it's a bit.
Yeah, no, it does. I think, in fact, I think you probably hit the nub of what really came out of the hearing for me, in that the issue that the school have set themselves, and I believe their policies are still the same, that they're basically saying, well, we want to be inclusive, and which is, that's normal. That's what everybody would want to say, because it's certainly fashionable, and you would hope it would be true. People would want to be inclusive, but so you may not say things which we don't like, but what they won't tell you is the things that you can't say that you don't like, and they'll tell you afterwards that the things you did say would set you against their policy. So there's not an ability to understand whether you are within or without the policy. I think that is an issue. I have to say that from my perspective, I didn't even think about checking to see whether I was in or outside of the policy, because what I was saying shouldn't have been controversial. But it did come back, and I suppose, in retrospect, one thing I would say is that it must have been clear to me that I understood that most of the school staff didn't understand Christianity, because they asked me to teach it, because they didn't understand it. And I think, but again, that's in retrospect. I would have expected that at least the school. I'm married to a teacher, and I know for a fact that it may have been a few decades back, but she certainly learned about all faiths, because she would need to be teaching about all faiths. It seems that they did know about lots of faiths, but they didn't understand the basis of Christianity, which, so there's a big disconnect there. And I think it's not going to be limited to this as an isolated case. It's going to be something which will be across the board. And that's a concern. And well, I suppose there are two things I have to say. One, if I've forgotten both questions and probably haven't answered either, so please do tell me if I've got anywhere near to answer either, and I'll ask me the other question if I have.
Yeah, sorry. So no, you definitely did. I think this you're very clear that it's not obvious what can and can't be said.
Yeah.
One is supposed to perhaps infer or infer from a general culture what is and isn't acceptable. You've already mentioned, I think, the kind of public-private problem, or the let's say the public institution problem, where it's the line is not clear in the social media age where something might be relevant or not. And obviously the code of conduct is very broad in its terms. As Linda mentioned, it's saying you're not really allowed to say anything on social media that may possibly bring the school into disrepute. So yeah, no, I think that's clear. And I think your point about, despite the rhetoric of inclusivity and diversity, there isn't, maybe in some cases, an understanding that diversity is also diversity of belief, and that we're all again supposed to sort of understand what diversity means. So no, I think that's you've covered what I was interested in. I'm being a little bit vague, I'm afraid, but I think
that's fine. Can I just give an example of, because I was trying to understand this within the disciplinary hearing. Actually, I was faced with this conundrum as to, well, why did you go against our policy? And I pretty much said, well, I don't believe I did go against your policy. I've not said anything which brought the school into disrepute. I've simply stated things that I have been stating for a number of years, and will continue to. And I asked the question, well, what would happen if I would, as I regularly do on Twitter, I will quote scripture. So if I quote from the Bible, would that be a problem? Well, no, of course not, they said. So, well, that's very helpful. Thank you. I've got a Bible in front of me. I'm just going to read you from Romans chapter 1. You may not be familiar with it. And so I read the whole of the chapter. I mean, it's a good opportunity. But it also showed, I think, that I could see in their response, they felt rather uncomfortable. I said, well, so if I put that on Twitter, would that be a problem? They wouldn't answer the question. I was told that's not what you don't ask the questions here. We're here to ask you questions. And so it just got closed down. But and it may have been a bit harsh. I could have chosen something which was probably less combative, but I wanted just really to make the point to ask that question. I also asked the question at the appeal hearing as to whether any of the people on the panel would take their children to a Pride event, and whether they would be willing to take their children, the school children, to a Pride event, as it's such a fine thing to do, and it's not really a problem. Should there be school trips perhaps to Pride events, to encourage everybody to find out how good it is? I asked that question alongside producing some photographs from some Pride events, which were explicit, and I did hand those around just so that it would help them, because I had also previously, I should have said, asked the question whether any of them had been to a Pride event. Well, no, that again, I was told, well, you don't need to answer that question, is what the panel were told by their HR advisor. You don't have to answer that, and they didn't. But that was the point. It's very difficult, really, to understand how their policies, and I actually believe that school policies should have been changed as a result of the hearing, because somebody else can be in exactly the same position, but they haven't changed their policies as far as I'm aware. I did ask for a copy of the policies under Freedom of Information. They seem to be very similar.
Okay, thank you. There will be a chance for more questions too, by the way, Nina, just so we will have so if you more occur to you in a bit. But Ian, can we come to you? Would you like to ask, put some questions to Keith?
Yeah. Keith, you said quite earlier on there was a discussion about Pride, and they knew your views from that discussion some months before your tweet, I think you said, and you advised against Pride. So did they sort of understand that you had a position on this, but do you think they just didn't understand the grounds?
Sorry, I think I may have confused you. The discussion, my kind of background on that was the discussion that took place was within our church.
Oh, right,
and it was people with young families saying, well, how can we reach out to others? Should we go along as a family to Pride? Should we take our children? And it was there that I had that discussion, which was the reason for the follow-up tweet that kicked all of this off. Sorry if I confused that.
Okay, so that was a discussion in the church, not with
it was.
The school people. Yeah.
No.
Okay. Yeah, I think you said the day after your tweet, or when you went to school afterwards, you were told to keep away from the children.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think their aim was there? Was it a question of you? There was a risk. You were. It was unsafe for you to be near the children. Was it that your views were forbidden because they were too offensive? Was it that you needed to be punished for saying that, or did they maybe fear that people might be persuaded of views that were different from theirs? Do you know why they might have forbidden you?
I was confused, and I guess that those things that you've outlined, I guess all of those perhaps went through my mind. I think the real reason was, though, the school teachers, or sorry, the school management, the head, deputy head, and senior teachers were all absolutely terrified of the parents and not doing what the parents wanted them to do. And so it was the kind of the effect of the mob. And when I say the parents, I'm talking about a vocal group of a very small number, and the majority who weren't parents but were active on Facebook. Because I know for a fact the majority of the parents who would speak to me privately away from the school so nobody could hear, or would say, look, you're doing exactly the right thing, you're saying the right things, but we daren't agree with you because we will be put in the same position. So I'm guessing that at the beginning, I'm thinking, well, I wonder what's going on. But then it became clear to me that it was they were frightened. They'd not had to deal with anything like this before. And instead of saying to those who made complaints, yes, we'll certainly look at your complaint, do come and speak to us, they didn't do that. It was an initial sort of straight, well, the trust got involved and their HR team got involved, and it all became very heavy too quickly. They could have actually dealt with the issue. I'd have been very happy to have a conversation with anybody who wanted to make a complaint and explain why I had said what I had said, and the context, as opposed to that was being, I was going to say published in social media, isn't exactly published as it spread in social media and published in the newspapers.
You mentioned that when you joined the school, the policies weren't all formed, and you actually wrote a policy on health and safety yourself. I mean, do you think that some of the policies of the school were rather half-baked, that maybe, particularly where they affect belief, that they were showing a sort of religious illiteracy, and they were rather vague, and they didn't quite know what they were proscribing? Would you put it like that?
I think that would be a fair thing to say, but I don't think it was because they had not been completed, written, or put out there. I think they are still half-baked. I think that is the problem. It does show both, I mean, a religious, but possibly a kind of a social illiteracy as well, in an understanding of society, as well as an understanding of faith from any direction, from any faith or none. I think probably there is an issue that everything is run on the kind of latest idea. The last idea in is the first idea out, and so and this may not be just, again, isolated to this school. It seems that what happens is everybody is so focused on their media profile or what people think of them that they don't have a basis of either faith. As a school, they're not going to have a basis of faith, but a base of understanding about who they are, what are their aims and objectives as an institution, and deal with those first. Because people will always disagree with what a school wants or what an organization wants. But if that organization is clear on that's the important thing. But it seems to me that their policies are written around about, well, what might somebody say? What are people going to think of us? It's kind of almost a marketing or media approach rather than what is the school here to do. Now, that may just be my cynical view, but it seems to me, from having been through all of this, that is actually the reality.
Thank you. Thanks.
Sorry, I muted myself there. Thank you, Ian. Gabriel, do you have any questions for Keith? Gabriel, can we invite you to unmute and ask questions? I think we have lost Gabriel for a minute. I'm sure he'll be back with us in a bit, but just let me come in again at this point then while we wait for Gabriel to rejoin us. You said that when this whole controversy started, it began with the editor of a local newspaper who you subsequently discovered was gay, who then got in touch with a local counsellor who is in a same-sex relationship.
Yeah.
Were you aware within the school, were there children of same-sex families? And
to be honest, I don't believe there were. There may have been. It would have had little effect on the way that I would have dealt with them or their parents. And often with schools, of course, you don't really get two parents dropping off. It's one or the other. And so I would probably have only seen one parent. But yeah, I mean, if that had been the case, it would have made no difference. And I wouldn't have discussed it, certainly wouldn't have discussed it with either the children or the parents. It wouldn't be my role or my place.
were there teachers or members of the Board of Governors who, to your knowledge, were gay? Or
Yes. Interestingly, a member of the Board of Governors who was also an Anglican ordinand, called Stephen Dove, was gay, and clearly, again, I didn't. It's not somebody I knew well. we had polite and pleasant conversations when that happened. But I then again discovered that he was very much involved in, well, the church should be in pride. He was delighted when Ely Cathedral were flying the pride flag, and so he was also on the appeal panel when it came to an appeal. I did ask for him not to be on the appeal because I did say that I felt he had a conflict of interest. But yeah, he was the only person that I was aware of. But again, I wouldn't have expected, whether he agreed or disagreed with what I said, I wouldn't have expected there to have been an issue with my ability to say it. That was my thoughts there. It became clearer as time went on that clearly he did have an issue, and in fact was possibly involved. He was mentioned by some of the complaints about me about how this must be awful for this poor man having to put up with such abuse from me.
These were complaints from other parents.
Yeah, so there were 2 or 3 parents, and they're in the court bundle. I think there are 3 complaints, which actually don't make an awful lot of sense as far as complaints, but they kind of more rants than complaints that were sent into the school, which really started off the whole process of the trust deciding that it was time that they dealt with me, I think.
So my understanding is that one of these complaints was what's called a formal complaint to the school,
Yes.
and that the school is required by the trust rules, where there is a formal complaint, to initiate an investigation. Is it right?
That may be the case. We had trouble getting to the bottom of this because I was told that there was a legal requirement for them to have an investigation all the way through, and I kept querying this, saying I don't actually believe there is a legal requirement. I thought that would be slightly over the top. It turned out that it was the trust had that but I couldn't find that anywhere in their documentation that would be the case.
So again, that just sounds like one of its rules of
that. Yeah. But it may be documented. They have an awful lot of documentation. They really do enjoy administration and bureaucracy. They've got a lot of stuff. So it could easily be in there. I could have missed it. But the interesting thing was that they themselves seemed to think it was a legal requirement. Somebody complains, you've got to have an investigation. Well, yes, you must investigate, surely. But investigating in the first instance is to ask a question. Nobody actually asked me the question before I was investigated on this. I wasn't even asked, well, what's gone on? What's precipitated all of this? It just
brings me to my next question. How do you think the school should have responded? I mean, clearly they should have asked you something from what you're saying, which they failed to do. How do you think they should have responded overall to the situation?
Well, I considered this, and again, I've been a reasonably senior manager previously. I've not come across this particular situation, but I've certainly come across situations and in university with students, with staff, where there are things that are reasonably or could be quite delicate and difficult that are always best dealt with by asking straightforward questions of the people who are involved. Even asking, well, this isn't any of the school's business, but clearly some of the parents and carers are concerned about this. Would you be willing to talk to them? I would have been willing to talk to them. Would you be willing to talk to us about it? Again, it's not the school's business. What they were complaining about wasn't really, I wasn't bringing the school into disrepute. I mean, by association, that was their concern. So I would have, that's the way I would have thought it would be best. Always start off softly, and if you've got to go for the the formal approach, then go for the formal approach and do it properly. That's absolutely right. But don't leap into something through fear. Look at the details, look at the issues involved, and work out a good pragmatic approach to make sure that it can be dealt with.
When I mean, you referred several times to being driven by fear into their response.
Mm.
Was there support for you within the school, within the parents? I know you said that you had several conversations in private, but was there more broadly, was there support for you evident within the school?
Not evident because, again, nobody dare say anything because they didn't want to be seen as somebody who was as such a hideous, hateful character as I was being portrayed as being. But I did have, again, very good relationship up until that point with many members of staff, and I'd been involved in counselling people with problems they'd had. It's just the nature of what happens when people get to know you. You're somebody who will listen. So I knew quite a lot of them very well, but I was told by one member of staff that nobody was going to be saying anything positive because they all were concerned that they would find themselves in a similar position.
And sorry, just I had a question as well.
Oh, Gabriel, good. I'm glad
hi.
you're back. I was just about to say, have we got Gabriel back yet?
No. There are many things it's a busy day, so there are many things happening simultaneously, which I won't detain you with. But were there any expressions of support privately from the staff members? Did anybody message you? Did anybody call you? I appreciate that nobody wanted to put their head over the parapet publicly, but
Yes.
were there any?
Yes.
Okay, and if so, could you basically just briefly describe those interactions?
It was simply, and they were verbal. Again, away from others. It was just simply a case of, well, there is nothing that you have done wrong. What you've said is perfectly reasonable, and you should be allowed to say it. That was the kind of gist of it.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions, Gabriel, at this point?
No, not from me.
Okay, thank you. Nina, do you have any further questions?
I mean, maybe just to harp on about this ignorance thing, but it does seem to me to be quite indicative of maybe a kind of shift in the broader culture. I mean, on the one hand, you're saying that people are asking you to teach Christianity and to cover that for the school and to take assemblies, which I'm just curious, when you gave those assemblies, were you in part or in whole reflecting on kind of Bible stories? I mean, when we were at school, this was common practice to have an assembly that was around a theme from the Bible, even if the message was sort of taught in a kind of humanist way ultimately. And so that's kind of one question, whether you were in a way sort of publicly, well, in the school, talking about Bible stories, and I suppose, yeah, just any broader reflections you have on the role of religion outside of your pastorship and outside of your own church and your own faith in the kind of in British culture. Like, do you where do you see the role outside of private worship and outside of your own kind of convictions in, let's say, institutions like a school, like education? So again, it's sort of, yeah, the first question is more specific. Were you talking about themes from the Bible in the assemblies? And the second one is, how do you see the role of Christianity, and particularly as part of the British as part of British culture?
Well, in the school, the assembly, it's interesting that the first assembly I said, well, will you take an assembly, but don't mention Jesus? So I said, but, and I thought about this. Yeah, I'll take an assembly, and I won't mention Jesus. So I did. There was faith involved, but I didn't mention Jesus. And then they asked me to do another one, and I did mention Jesus. And I was then asked to speak at the school carol service, at which I gave the gospel message. and I was careful how I did it because I didn't want to offend anybody unnecessarily, because I wanted the opportunity to do those kinds of things again. So what I did, they'd sung some very good, very sound Christmas carols, which lots of them are. And so I referenced those words. I didn't reference the Bible, but of course they're referencing the Bible, and I made it clear what it was all about. I took a year group who had they were having to study the crucifixion, and so I was asked whether I would teach various classes about this, and I said, well, I'm happy to take the whole year group, and you know, the children can ask me questions and I'll answer them. You know, any question can do. Get as gruesome as they want, because that's usually what happens with children and the crucifixion, I'm afraid. And we did. We had been given. I'd been given half an hour. We actually went up for 50 minutes, but had trouble stopping the children and actually some of the staff asking questions. I took a different year group, and they were looking at well, what else happened before Easter. So I had them acting out Palm Sunday, and used the Gospels to do so. So that happened. Whether the school management were totally aware of that or not, whether it was just, but certainly those who were the heads of those years would have been aware of that, because they're asking me to do it. And certainly the head teacher would have been aware of what I was saying, in, you know, not just in school assemblies, but also to the whole school and parents, grandparents, or whatever at carol services. So that's in the first instance, that was all fine. And, you know, again, parents, carers, staff seemed to be really quite content and actually enjoyed the ability to be involved in those things. Generally across culture, well, I think that's where there is this kind of culture war, as we're told we shouldn't get involved in culture wars. Well, and we are in a culture war in that sense, I guess, because there has been a shift again, and I do feel it's been driven by, well, it certainly will have been driven by people with certain agendas, but it also, you know, there is the kind of crowd mentality. Social media is really good at that, and so very quickly there is a shift in thinking. Or, you know, suddenly we don't want anybody religious involved in this or that. But and I think Nina, you mentioned that we are, you know, a nominally Christian country. I mean, I think maybe we are, maybe we're not. We certainly were. And so, and all of our laws and all of our structures, all of our morality is based on that. And I think there has become a disconnect from what we are actually institutionally to what people think we are. I don't know whether I'm articulating that particularly well, but it's an interesting situation we find ourselves in, where it's not that the whole of our institutions and society is kind of against Christianity, but the way that plays out, it does appear that way, that we're not welcome in certain places any longer, because we may be offensive and we may upset somebody. But interestingly, that doesn't appear to be the same for all faiths or none. You know, there are some who are more welcome, and certainly those who would say that they don't have a faith, atheists, they clearly do have a faith, it just happens to be in themselves. But, you know, they're welcome everywhere. It does seem that there is, you know, a supposedly more inclusive society has become exclusive, or inclusive so long as you say what people want you to say.
Keith, let me just before I turn to Ian, just ask you, what was the a very basic question, the school itself, what was the ethnic and religious breakdown of the school?
There were very few. I think there were 2 or 3 children from Muslim families. Majority were white European. I think there are a couple probably with East Asian origin. As far as faith, I would suggest that the majority had none. And there were, I mean, I knew that those parents who were from Christian faith, or the children from Christian faith, their parents certainly made it known to me how delighted they were that there was at least some, at least one member of the staff who was a Christian. I would think probably as a percentage of the school, probably between 5 and 10%.
Okay.
Christian. Yeah.
Thank you. That's helpful. Ian, do you have any further questions?
Keith, you mentioned, I think there were a couple of particularly vehement complaints about you. I think there was a husband and wife. The formal complaint came from the husband, who was really focusing on what he thought was the hurt to homosexuals from disagreeing with Pride. And then I think that was followed up by an email from his wife, and that was really more focusing on your church and finding things on your church website which she thought was offensive. I think particularly she said, talked about homophobic things and abortion policies on your church website. So do you think that was rather, it was an attack on your church? Was that a large part of what you were encountering, do you think?
Yes, it was. And actually, I invited anybody who would like to look at our church website at the time to do so. We certainly would have had nothing that could even vaguely be described as homophobic, because we wouldn't have. That is not, well, you're Christians, that's not what we're going to be doing. But I was told that I may, I think I had preached against homosexuals, which I wouldn't have done. I would have preached against the practice of homosexuality. I was pleased that people have been listening to sermons, though. It's always a good start. But abortion, yes, again, I had been in the newspaper a few years before, 2 or 3 years before. It had been a relatively neutral piece. I'd been asked about abortion, and I'd said, pretty straightforwardly what the Christian position is, what the biblical position is. So I would have been known for that. But as a church, we did have issues. So we were a new church. We had been planted into an area of Ely, which Ely is a relatively kind of middle class place, but everywhere has its areas that are less popular than others. And this is 1930s council estate that had once had shops and a community, but all of that had gone. So that the church was there for that purpose, to try and reach those people, and we did. But it meant that we were in rented accommodation, and the accommodation we're in at the point, we'd been in a local Anglican school at the in fact invited by the head teacher there, who was delighted to have us there for a good 10 years. But he unfortunately had to retire due to ill health, and the Anglican school was taken over by somebody as a head who was more in favor of Buddhism than Christianity. And we found that we were encouraged to move on. So we moved into a council-owned facility. And part of the issue that arose as a result of all of the kind of media storm around what I had said meant that the local councils were desperately trying to get us out. And the police got involved, inviting me to a meeting to discuss how I could be much more community focused and kind to the people around me. I did decline attending that meeting. And such things went on, really. So there was a kind of broad attack. The biggest issue, really, though, was the effect that it has on one's family. for me, I do tend to brush things off and just kind of move with it. But you know, when your children are involved and your wife is involved, it's certainly quite tricky. But again, local community, the people around us were very supportive. It's interesting how you know, the electronic mob, as it were, can be massive, but you know, the people around who've known us for years and were actually very glad we were where we were as a church, and we had plenty of support there locally.
Yeah. Did you detect much genuine concern actually for the children? I noticed that even one of the hostile activists asked about Pride said that there's no way that she would take her children to a Pride event. Did that make you think that really it was an ideological position rather than a concern for the children that was behind the attack on you?
Yes, it really wasn't a concern for the children. I mean, certainly within the school, I mean, without going into lots of details, there have been some very troubled children who you know, I at one point was actually catching bricks that a child was throwing at a teacher to protect the teacher from a child, protecting children from other children, because some of these, you know, I'm not painting the school as a kind of dreadful place, but they had got a few children, and they had a discipline policy which is very, very softly, shall we say. So discipline isn't really very high on their agenda, which meant that there were a number of these issues popping up. So as far as safety was concerned, I think there were you know, many parents who were aware that if anything, I was probably helping with safety, and they didn't think that I was expecting to be you know, a kind of sexual predator either when it came to their children. I think it really did come from the journalist and the counsellors who had started to get their friends involved, and for fear possibly that the local people would think, well, actually, we're not very keen on this Pride thing. It was a protection, I think, of their event, which caused them to take every possible opportunity to try and shut me down, as it were. But it's not as if I have kind of a regular campaign against Pride. It was simply, I made a statement which was from a basis of Christian faith to those of the Christian faith. You know, my Twitter account is very clear. I tweet to Christians about Christian things, and things that are appropriate for Christians to know, and I use it for kind of lobbying, certainly for things where it comes to you know, pro-life issues and against the sexualization of children. There are a couple of things that are big, but only because they're big in society, not because I want to make them big.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Gabriel, do we have Gabriel back with us? And do you have any further questions?
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, that there was a temporary, basically, blip. I'm just trying to think if there's anything. Not really. No, I think we've covered all the bases. Nothing from me.
Okay, thank you, Gabriel. I just have a couple more quick questions then, Keith, and then we will draw to a close, I think. You've talked about the effects on you, short term of the council trying to get you out, and the police inviting you to a meeting. Just a quick thought, were you intimidated by that invitation?
I think I was slightly taken aback by the invitation, and concerned. I think I'm possibly intimidated. I think I was probably more concerned that the police were actually involved in something, and it was from somebody who's this is all about community policing and community cohesion and all of those buzzwords, which are wonderful but are a bit floppy. But the interesting thing was the policeman who actually contacted me was a Christian who I was aware of, and so I think he was rather embarrassed to be making that call as well.
He made it clear to you that you didn't have to accept it, of course.
Oh no, he didn't. No, I mean
Yeah,
he made he made it. He was you know he towed the party line and said, well, you know, this is something that would be really helpful, and the council would be very pleased if you would attend, and you know, it would certainly help with community cohesion. I did remember asking him, well, how would it help with community cohesion? He didn't really know that, but I think he thought it might be good for me to hear what other people believe. Well, I'm not actually that ignorant that I don't know what people believe, but I'm happy to have a debate with somebody, but I don't think it was going to be a debating society. I think it was going to be sit down and listen and go away and be a good boy. But it was, yeah, I mean, I probably found it more amusing, but that's just my personality. I'm afraid I do tend to, that's the way I often deal with these things, look at them and think, well, is this serious or not?
But you declined.
Is there any value in it?
To take it.
Sorry.
You declined the invitation.
I did decline the invitation. Yeah. Yeah.
What has been the longer term effect of all this on you? I mean, it's a couple of years ago since the events that we're talking about, isn't it? So have there been a longer term effect on you now?
No, I think it was all really around that time. I mean, as with all things, you know, things happen in life, and you kind of move through them and move on to the next phase. Interestingly, prior to this happening, we were looking. We were aware that we'd planted this church. We'd been there 12 years. It was time for us to move on, and that was before this happened. And so it kind of coincided with looking, well, where is the Lord moving us to now? And so in the midst of all of this, we did start to look at where to move to next. And so some of that was actually reported as, you know, oh, we've won, we've got them out. But that wasn't the case at all. But it was interesting, of course, when interviewed by a church, it was seen as a positive rather than a negative. You know, somebody who's willing to stand and say these things, but not go out there to try and batter people with them. I mean, that's the difficulty. We're painted as people who are desperately trying to force people to live our way. And so when you want to share Christian love, which is what we want to do, that is often the tool that's used. And I think that was an effective tool for the mob, as it were, that I found myself being attacked by. It was effective in that they managed to use all of the connections they had to just try and put across the picture of something which was actually very different, because, you know, I was told I was attacking people. My words were clear. They were not attacking people. They were speaking about an event. They weren't even attacking the event. They were just saying it wasn't appropriate for Christians. And so the twisting of those things, I think, things that really do have a big effect. So that's, I suppose, the only kind of long-term thing would be that it certainly has made me more aware of the risks of you know, how do we communicate things. I always thought about that, and I'd always thought about the words I would have used. I wouldn't have wanted to be offensive towards individuals. I certainly wouldn't want to attack individuals in that sense. But I think it does. You do have to wonder, even when you say something which is reasonable and rational, there is always, well, is there going to be any fallout from this, which I would never have considered before. But to be honest, that's a minor thing. So really, it certainly has had an effect on my wife and daughters as far as long term, because it's something which they would think back to as a really kind of hideous period.
I can imagine. With all these risks, are you concerned about the possibility of Christians taking on public roles, working in these sorts of environments? Do you think it's going to become increasingly difficult, or are you optimistic that we are going to have the imposition of a more even playing field when it comes to freedom of speech and thought?
I would like to be optimistic, but I think the evidence for us shows that we are on a downward trajectory, and we can see that if you in an election year, the politics around this, certainly looking at some of the stuff that's been coming out of the Labour Party, are a bit kind of ahead of things on getting ready for the election. It seems a lot of this seems to be pushing towards things which will give us more of a difficulty if we don't sign up to certain social policies. Then being employed in certain places could be more difficult. It's the way it seems. I think even without that, where we're at, it is very difficult. I mean, we have Christians in my present church in schools who really find it difficult to articulate their faith, even within the staff room, let alone within the school, in ways that they wouldn't have even thought about. It would just, because it's who they are. I think there, and in healthcare as well, it does seem to be increasingly an issue.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Unless there are further questions from anybody. So Chi, looking at the... No? Well,
No.
I think we are there. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our commissioners. Keith, again, thank you very much for coming and sharing your story today. It is
Well, thank you for the work you're doing.
Well, yes, thank you. We need to make the facts fully known, I think, before Parliament in the country in general. So it is of value what you've shared today, and thank you.